It is my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker who's going to be talking to us about a very important topic, that being navigating business in times of unrest. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Dennis Stafford from Organic Soul Marketing, which is a firm focusing on serving nonprofits, entrepreneurs, and the music industry, of course. Dennis Stafford, thank you so much for being here.
Testing, testing. Just want to make sure this thing is working. Um, Thanks so much for you all being here today. I really appreciate it. You could be anywhere. I know it's food time, so I would imagine some of you are thinking about lunch. So I'm going to do my best to make sure that this is a well-spent 30 minutes with things that you can really take back with you. So my name is Dennis Stafford, as she said. Organic Soul Marketing is a boutique marketing firm that specifically works with people in music industry, nonprofits, small business. Probably the most important thing I would share there is that we're really all about building relationships. And you'll see why that kind of figures into our talk. Probably a good place to start, too, is to frame the conversation today so you know what this conversation is and is not. So just a couple of things. One of the things that inspired me to put this together was, I don't know how many of you saw some of the news reports of what can happen on the bad end of a protest. Vandalism, things of that nature. And the reality is I have a lot of friends in this business, and I care about my friends in this business. And I started thinking about, is there anything I could do or what could be done just to help business owners who may end up in some crazy situations? So one of the things I hope you'll take away from this conversation is, the same way there are emergency plans for tornadoes, emergency plans for floods, emergency plans for earthquakes. And if you think about it, an emergency plan, the goal of an emergency plan is to mitigate loss of life. It is to mitigate loss of property. And it's also to, there we go. I got to get used to this technology stuff here. And hopefully to help businesses stay up and running. So one of the things I hope you'll take away from today is consider this as information to help you put together an emergency plan, but an emergency plan in a time of civil unrest. So that's one piece of it. The other thing I thought about, though, as I began working on this particular presentation, is I had to just think a lot about just the very general business environment that we're in. Certainly, we're still in a time of unrest. And I don't know about you all, you can maybe think about this yourself, but it just also seems to me in general like people are meaner or more angry. It feels like we're in a more of a conflicted time. So from that standpoint, a part of today's talk is to help you as business owners, whatever it is that you do, just kind of think about how do you navigate these kind of unusual waters that we're in right now. So there's those things. The other thing that I really hope you're going to get out of today is in the midst of what can be some challenging things I'm going to talk about, there are also opportunities. It often seems like in the middle of a crisis or time of unrest, there can be what I think of as hidden opportunities. But in this case, the opportunities are not so hidden. And the point I would make at the outset is one of the things I think you're going to see is that in looking at ways to navigate the place where we're at, so often it's going to come back to communication. It's going to come back to the conversations you're having with employees. It's going to come back to how well you're connecting with your customers. So I say that to say this is just not all broken glass and bad things. I hope to leave you with some really interesting, good things to take with you as well. Does that sound all right? Very cool. Okay, I got a thumbs up. I'll take that. You know, whenever you're doing this and the lights are so bright, you're like, is there anybody out there? Is anybody out there? Okay, there we go. I appreciate that. So the other thing would be this. Um, let's talk for a minute about what this conversation is and is not. So at the outset, I would say, certainly I'm not here to offer any particular professional legal advice, medical advice, HR. That's sort of like my big disclaimer, so none of you all can think about trying to sue me for anything. But so you're going to find that in select times throughout the conversation I'm going to have, I'm actually going to suggest places where I do think it makes a lot of sense to call upon a professional. So know that. I think the last thing then is, while I like to think this is a really great presentation, well put together and very thorough, certainly I'm not going to be able to answer every question. But if you'll hang with me for another, 30 minutes or so, you're going to walk away from here both with a way to navigate a crisis situation and, as importantly, with a foundation with insights to help you kind of think about how to deal with these waters that we're in. Okay, so with that intro, I think the next thing I should really probably do is answer the question, why the heck should you listen to me? Some of you I know, many of you I don't. So the first thing I would tell you is I am fortunate to have a very diverse background in this industry. And I've worked with some really great companies, media companies, manufacturing more recently, working on that end of our business, working for concert venues, and also with in music education, which is what GrooveU is. But I want to speak to two particular things I think that help me be a appropriate speaker for today's topic. So number one, Organic Soul, which is my company. Here's my point. I know what it's like with the phrase, the buck stops here. I know what it's like when you're the one responsible for making sure the lights stay on, for making sure payroll is met. So a part of today, I have the benefit of bringing to it a very practical perspective. So no BS. Now, Oneness, I was very fortunate to be a co-founder of this nonprofit. The Oneness focus was racial unity through music, the arts, and education. So even though I, for the most part, worked a lot in the marketing side and a lot in membership and fundraising, I had the opportunity to listen to some of the most amazing, notable thinkers, professors, people working in the fields of race, culture, activism. So, as we have this conversation today, I would want you to know that I bring together then two perspectives. One being the very practical, and the other one being a very much an understanding of the social implications. So, at least you know I'm just not some. I didn't just bum rush the stage and take the clicker to try to make this thing go. So, with that being said, you know, I began to kind of think about, you know, how do I start to kind of navigate you into the meat of what I'm going to talk about? And I think the best way to do that is I'll tell you a little story. Now, this is a story that was originally shared by Randall Stevenson, who's the retired CEO of AT&T. And he shared this at a company-wide presentation. A visitor visits a small village. This little village is called Shady Lake. Shady Lake is a beautiful, idyllic, wonderful little village, rolling hills. There's a beautiful river that runs through the midst of it. But as this visitor is walking around, he noticed something kind of disturbing. He sees that many of the villagers there have been injured. And in fact, some are missing a hand. Others are missing an arm. Some are missing a foot. So the visitor then, he goes to the local inn and he says, oh my gosh, Shady Lake is this beautiful village. But what is going on with the injured villagers? Many of them are maimed. What's going on? The innkeeper then replies, he says, you know, Shady Lake is a beautiful place. The problem here in Shady Lake, though, is we have an alligator. The alligator lives in the river. And invariably, every day, the alligator comes out of the river, attacks some of our villagers, and with that is the reason why we have this terrible issue with our people being maimed. The visitor says, this is crazy. Can't you all come together, have a conversation about this? Can't you figure out some way to deal with your alligator problem? The innkeeper says, yeah, we really should, but around here, it's considered impolite to talk about the alligator. Now, here's my point. There are some subjects that are hard to talk about. They can feel weird, they can feel kind of tough, but there are some things that we have to talk about. Let's go back a year. On May 25th was when George Floyd was killed. The very next day, the 26th, there were a scattering of protests. Within 10 days, there were protests in 550 cities, over 350,000 people. Here's my point, and this starts to also get into this whole idea of what's in all this for you. Why is it relevant for you? Well, I would say this. If you're a store owner, if you're a business person, things that affect your customers, your employees, your community, if it impacts them, it impacts you. And the hard reality is some of the things we faced last year in the area of civil unrest were big, they were widespread, and they were diverse. So this was not a big city problem. This was not a little town problem. It was an issue that affected many of us. So that's reason one of the what's in it for you. The other thing I would share at the outset in terms of the relevance of this conversation is it has real, lasting, there is a potential real impact on your business. So I think, Lana, so I have to tell you, I'm so fortunate. The picture you're looking at here is Lana Negrete. I have to make sure I get the print. Okay. She's amazing. She has Santa Monica music. The pictures you're seeing are pictures of her store boarded up. And this is on the back end of a crisis situation. I'll show you one other one too. This is a picture taken from Riverton Piano Company in Scottsdale, James Harding. So two things. Point number one is that aside from how big this issue has been, it has real practical effects or impact. The other thing I would say, and this is something I'm particularly pleased about, is in preparing for today's talk, I had the amazing opportunity to speak to some incredible retailers. Lana is one of them. Lana is amazing. I also had a chance to speak with Michael Kerman of Steve's Music in Canada and James Harding of Riverton Piano Company. So you should know that as I'm having this conversation, this is not esoteric. I'm not just going to make things up and try to purport or communicate things that are not true. I had the benefit of real insight from people who are on the front line dealing with different crisis situations. So thank you, Lana. Thanks to Michael. Thanks to James. And I also should thank Zach. He's the person who was kind enough to invite me here and help me meet some of these amazing retailers. So wherever Zach may be at, thank you, thank you, thank you, Zach. Now, the other thing to consider here early on, I think I began to tell you about this idea of opportunities and crises. I told you that sometimes in the midst of hard, bad things can be something good or something positive. So the other thing that I would be remiss if I didn't point out was how people came together in these situations. And very often, the reason they were able to come together is because of the relationships that either a owner had with their employees or the relationship a store owner may have had with their community. So let me just point out a couple of things. I'll let you read the quotes for yourself, but at Riverton Piano Company, very cool that it was the employees and members of the local community that came together to help get the store back up and going. And then I really, really like this story with Lana and Santa Monica Music. She'll certainly correct me if I get this wrong, but my understanding is that she had, I think it was a customer in your community, and so believed in the value of that particular store, they started a GoFundMe page. The goal was $80,000. Raised was $83,000. So as we think about this whole topic, and as we think about its relevance to us, the other point that I really wanted to try to emphasize, and I'll do so repeatedly, is there are opportunities, and a lot of those opportunities have to do with relationships, communication, consultation. So we'll get into that a little bit more. So let's get into the meat of this so we can really kind of pull some things apart. Oh, and I should tell you, I do have a summary of all the notes. So for any of you all who might want to be emailed the summary of our notes, I'll give you my cell number at the end. You can text me your email address. I'll send them to you. So I wanted to make sure you knew that. So first of all, as we get our brains around how to deal with these times, where you stand matters. So why? Now, I know you've heard this term cancel culture. Let's think about this a different way. The short story is that people these days now tend to vote their values with their dollars. Increasingly, people will shop at places that reflect things they believe in. If you have a position that's very antithetical to what your customers believe, would it not potentially affect your bottom line? Certainly. So your position on some issue matters to your bottom line. Similarly, where you stand on an issue affects your employees. Again, this is not really a rocket science concept. If you think about it, if there's some issue that you believe that's very different from your employees or something they feel extremely distasteful, you may find that, or you may see that there are issues with their morale or performance. So that's another reason why it's important for you to think through where it is that you stand. A couple of other things. So in terms of music's legacy and how people see you through that window, if you think about it, the people here in this room, we are a very unique group. I don't think anybody would argue with that. Music has long been a voice for positive change. I can talk about Willie Nelson and John Cougar Mellencamp with Farm Aid. I could talk about Live Aid, which raised, I think, over $245 million for famine relief. Or, I don't want to date myself too much, but we can even talk about the great protest music of the 60s. It's relevant to your position from this standpoint. You will be seen through the lens of our business. And if you take positions that seem very outside of the norm for what we do, then just understand that could be a factor. Last thing, and again, I love the fact that I'm having a conversation with you all because I feel like this is all my little club. You all know firsthand authenticity is key. People can smell BS a mile away. And I'm sure you and yourself can think of times when some company talked the talk but didn't walk the walk. And right now with social media, it does not take a lot for bad things to spread. So, very important to really think through and have a clear position on whatever the social issue is of the day. Number two, now this is something I particularly feel very strongly about, and I think I can make a pretty clear analogy or describe it. Okay, let's be honest, we're in a crazy time. There were tons of protests. There is a distinction, I think, to be made between protesters and criminals. Protesters protest. Criminals commit crimes. I see them as two different entities. Now, let's talk about what, and I love the quote here from Michael. And this is something that I think Lana mentioned. It's also something that James mentioned. They would talk about how they're in their store. They know there's a protest brewing. They see that but at first they've all said, oh, I noticed there were protesters, there were moms and strollers and parts of that were very peaceful. But invariably, they would also say but then they notice some other crowd. Somebody else coming behind. Maybe these are people with bandanas tied around their neck. Maybe they are opportunists, skater kids just trying to see if they can pick up on something free. Okay, here's why it's important. I own a business. If something goes crazy and somebody throws a brick through my window, I'm going to be mad. I'm not going to lie. I'm not going to try to paint some pretty picture. But this helps me be mad at the right people. That's important because then if somebody sticks a microphone in your face asking you, well, what's going on, you're able to say, you know what? This happened. These people committed a crime. I hope they're caught. This is what we need to do to stop this. And at the same time, you can say, but these people over here, it's really unfortunate they were tainted by some of the bad things. The other point is that in this particular case, it will allow you to have a greater degree of understanding or insight of people who might be committed to or involved in certain issues, even if you feel different about it. So you have a greater degree of insight. Okay, next of all, so this now starts to get again to more of the meat of what we were talking about, creating an emergency plan for civil unrest. Here's my point. I can't tell you everything you should do to create a plan, but I would tell you it's important to have a plan that addresses things like what happens if there is a safety issue, street closures, things of that nature. The way, in my opinion, to help create that plan is to consider pulling together your staff, pulling together your management, and having a conversation. It's far better to have a plan and not need it than to need a plan and not have it. And by coming together and discussing what could be some of the critical things that could happen in a crisis situation, could give you an opportunity to begin to think those things through. The other thing I listed on here, just as passing, I mentioned press. The reason why I've got this on here is because in the digital age, whatever you say that can be captured on video or on a microphone could live forever. And I like you all. I don't want any of you all to end up being a weird meme. I don't want you to end up being the butt of some joke of some viral video. I can't tell you what you would do in a crisis situation. I would simply say, be thoughtful about what it is that you might want to convey if you're in that situation. Number 4, again, pretty straightforward. If you've got kids or you yourself, social media, nothing new. But in the from the standpoint of what we're talking about today, it's got really two great applications. Application number one is to know what's going on around you. You've got a store somewhere here, let's say in the greater Tennessee area. You hear about something going on, some protest that's not far from you. You can't wait for the 6 o'clock news to update you. You're not going to leave your store to find that out. But if you've got a relationship with people in your community, chances are on your Facebook feed, on your Twitter feed, you can have some idea of what's going on and can prepare. Similarly, if you're in a position where you need to convey information, you're going to close the store early. Or, hey, we know there's things going on, but my store is open. Come do business. Social media is a great way to get that information out. If you're asked to display signs, no clear right or wrong, one of those things you have to convey on a case-by-case basis. I'm just putting that out there because if you're like me, you saw a ton of signs. And chances are when you saw various signs, you had different feelings. People will have feelings, so it's a thing you have to kind of think through. If you are asked to support some cause financially or issue some statement of support, it can hurt, it can help. I would advise you to really think about maybe what you've done in the past as a guide. That way, if you choose or choose not to do a thing, you can point to that as a reason why. Great to have written policies if you don't have them. And then you can certainly, as an alternative, offer employees the chance to volunteer in some way. Now, my time is almost up, so I'll try to condense this last part. This is the final point. So if you think about it, if there's something weird going on, people are going to talk about it. You can't really stop that. What you can do is be proactive in managing it. You want a workplace where the employees can be productive. Ultimately, that's what you want. And if you can create an environment where people feel like they can talk, but can talk in a way that is helpful, maybe reduces the chance of bullying, harassment, you may find that having an environment with healthy dialogue is good for your employees, it's good for the store. This is not an easy thing to do. It takes a person with expertise. You may not have it. This could be an area you want to bring somebody in to help out. But again, this is also an area that I would say could be very helpful to bring staff, management together to have a conversation, to talk about, hey, we want some ground rules for how we're going to talk to each other during this time or in general. Last thing, very quickly, we all know this saying, customer is always right. Certainly, we always treat customers great. We need to do that. But in our time right now of people being angry, if you have an employee that's being berated by a customer, threatened, which increasingly could be the case, I would argue that for you to stand up for that employee says something very great for your business, makes your employees know that you care, which starts to get again to the point of loyalty. Okay, so as I wrap, create an emergency plan to be proactive. Distinguish between protesters and lawbreakers. Seek professional advice where it's appropriate. And I'm going to read this last point verbatim because I believe it strongly. Conversations with employees, customers, and the community during a time of unrest offer unique opportunities to build stronger relationships. That's what we're all about at Organic Soul. We base our business off of creating strong relationships as a way to help grow business. Again, I'll be hanging out for a while. I'll give you business cards. Text me at this number if you'd like a copy of the notes. And you can also feel free to visit organicsoul.com to find out more about what we do and how we might be able to help you. You all were great. Nobody threw tomatoes at me. Nobody ran out. So I'm going to assume at least it wasn't, hopefully it gave you something of some value. I really, really appreciate you all being here. So thank you very much.
Dennis Stafford, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for this very important conversation. And we will be right back. Thank you.